There is a specific kind of strength that the world rarely celebrates because it does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a speech or a press release or a carefully timed photograph outside a palace gate. It arrives early in the morning, in a black car pulling up to a venue that nobody particularly famous has heard of, for an engagement that will not trend on social media and will not be discussed at dinner tables across the country. It arrives in the form of a woman in her mid-70s, in a tartan jacket, shaking hands with farmers at an agricultural conference, and then driving herself home afterward. Princess and the Princess Royal has been that kind of strong for more than 50 years. And in the last 2 years, as the British royal family has navigated one of the most genuinely difficult periods in its modern history, that strength has become something the institution cannot function without. The story of where the monarchy stands today requires starting with what happened to it in a remarkably short window of time. Prince Harry stepped away from royal duties in January 2020. Prince Andrew was removed from public royal life following his catastrophic BBC interview in November 2019 and his entanglement in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, faced a serious cancer diagnosis in early 2024 and spent much of that year managing treatment and recovery away from full public duties. And in February 2024, Buckingham Palace made an announcement that stopped the country. King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer and would be stepping back from public-facing engagements while continuing to manage state business from Clarence House. Within the space of roughly 4 years, the group of people actively carrying the visible weight of the working monarchy had shrunk to a size that the institution had not seen in decades. The people left standing in that space, doing the work every single day, were a much smaller and more pressured group than anyone had anticipated when Charles ascended to the throne in September 2022. At the center of that group, without question and without serious competition for the position, was Princess Anne. Understanding why requires understanding something about how royal duty actually operates, as opposed to how it appears from the outside. The public image of the monarchy is built on the major events, the state visits, the balcony appearances, the ceremonial moments that fill television screens and newspaper front pages. What sustains the institution on an ordinary Tuesday in November is something far less glamorous. It is investiture ceremonies at Windsor Castle, where hundreds of people receive their honors from a member of the royal family, and for whom that moment is genuinely one of the most significant of their lives. It is patronage visits to hospitals, schools, charities, and military units that depend on royal involvement for their fundraising profile and their public visibility. It is agricultural shows and engineering conferences and lifeboat station openings and regimental dinners. It is, in other words, an enormous and relentless workload distributed across a group of people who are expected to represent the crown competently, warmly, and without complaint regardless of what else is happening in their own lives. In 2023, Princess Anne completed 457 of these engagements, more than any other member of the royal family. In 2024, despite suffering a concussion in June after an incident involving a horse at her Gatcombe Park estate that required a hospital stay, she completed 474 engagements. In 2025, she completed 478. The consistency of those numbers, maintained across years and across personal setbacks, is not normal. It is exceptional by any standard, royal or otherwise. What makes it more remarkable is the absence of self-promotion attached to it, and does not give interviews about her schedule. She does not release statements about the volume of her work or its importance. She showed up and kept showing up, and the numbers exist in the official royal engagement records for anyone willing to look. When King Charles was hospitalized briefly in March 2025 for side effects related to his cancer treatment, and visited him at Clarence House the following morning, and then led a scheduled investiture ceremony at Windsor Castle the same day. That detail, reported quietly and without drama, captures something essential about who she is and why Charles relies on her in the way that he does. The constitutional underpinning of that reliance was formalized through legislation that passed with very little public attention in 2022. The Counsellors of State Act 2022 added Princess Anne and Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, to the list of Counsellors of State, the individuals legally authorized to carry out the monarch's official duties when the sovereign is ill or traveling abroad. The existing list, as defined by earlier legislation, included the monarch's spouse and the next 4 adults in the line of succession over the age of 21. In practice, this meant Prince Harry, Prince Andrew, and Princess Beatrice remained technically on the list despite none of them being working royals, a situation that had become legally awkward and practically meaningless. The 2022 Act resolved this by adding an Edward with a specific provision that they would retain the designation for life, unlike those whose position on the list will shift as younger royals come of age. During the Lords' debate on the bill, the government confirmed that only working members of the royal family would be called upon to act as counsellors of state in practice. The legislation was, in constitutional terms, the formal recognition of something that was already true in practice, and an Edward were the people the institution actually depended upon. Being a counsellor of state carries real authority. 2 or more counsellors acting together can attend Privy Council meetings, sign routine state documents, and receive the credentials of new ambassadors on the monarch's behalf. There are limitations. They cannot dissolve Parliament except on the King's explicit instruction, cannot create new peers, and cannot exercise the King's functions as head of state for the Commonwealth realms such as Australia and Canada. But within the United Kingdom, the constitutional scope is substantial. For a king managing an ongoing cancer diagnosis and continuing treatment, knowing that the people legally empowered to act in his name are the 2 siblings who have spent their entire adult lives inside the working institution is not a minor comfort. It is the difference between a structurally secure arrangement and a fragile one. The relationship between Charles and Anne has its roots in a childhood that, for all its extraordinary external circumstances, contained something genuinely ordinary at its core. 2 siblings who were close in age and who leaned on each other in the particular way that children do when the adults around them are frequently occupied with demanding responsibilities. They are 2 years apart, born in 1948 and 1950. Their parents carried the weight of the crown and its demands across a reign that lasted 70 years. And the 2 eldest children developed a bond that has never weakened across the decades since, and is known within the royal circle as one of the very few people who will tell Charles what she actually thinks. She does not manage him. She does not flatter him. She disagrees with him when she believes he is wrong, and she offers her genuine opinion when he asks for it. In an environment where most people around a monarch are professionally inclined to smooth rather than challenge, that quality is genuinely rare, and Charles has valued it throughout his reign. The decision to appoint and his gold stick in waiting at his coronation in May 2023, an ancient ceremonial role placing the holder symbolically responsible for the sovereign's personal protection, was widely reported as a ceremonial gesture. Those who understand the relationship between these 2 siblings read it as something more specific. It was a public declaration of private trust. That trust extended, in August 2025, to a gesture toward the man who has stood beside Anne for 33 years. At a private ceremony at Balmoral Castle, noted only in the court circular, with no photographs released and no formal statement, King Charles invested Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence with the insignia of Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. Timothy Lawrence is Anne's husband, and in the decades since their marriage in December 1992, he has maintained one of the most genuinely unassuming profiles of anyone connected to the royal family. He received no princely title when he married, and he holds no official working royal role. He is a retired Royal Navy officer, a former equerry to Queen Elizabeth II, the role through which he first met, and in the late 1980s, who rose to the rank of Vice Admiral before retiring from military service in 2011. He appears at his wife's side at engagements, travels with her on overseas tours, and is virtually never the subject of a headline in his own right. For 3 decades, in a family and a media environment where even peripheral royal connections attract sustained attention, he has managed to be present without being prominent. That is not an accident. It is a consistent and deliberate choice. The Royal Victorian Order is the right vehicle for recognizing that kind of loyalty precisely because of what it is. Unlike almost every other honor in the British system, it is not recommended by government ministers, does not pass through committee review, and is not subject to any process outside the direct personal decision of the sovereign. It exists specifically to recognize personal service to the monarch and the royal family, and it is entirely the king's own gift to give. The highest grade Knight Grand Cross places Timothy symbolically alongside Queen Camilla, Catherine the Princess of Wales, and Sophie the Duchess of Edinburgh, all of whom hold the same rank. For a man who is technically outside the working royal structure, to receive that recognition at Balmoral in a private ceremony is not a routine administrative matter. Charles does not give this honor casually. He gave it to his brother-in-law at a specific moment in a specific place, and the message it carries in the language the monarchy uses for these things is clear. 33 years of quiet, reliable, visible only when needed support have been noticed. The loyalty has been acknowledged by the one person whose acknowledgement carries the weight of the crown. Taken together, the Counsellors of State legislation, the gold stick appointment, the daily operational reliance on and during periods of royal incapacity, the Knight Grand Cross for Timothy, these decisions form a coherent picture. Charles is not making sentimental gestures toward people he happens to like. He is making structural decisions about the institution he leads, reinforcing the people who are actually holding it together, and doing so in ways that will outlast the current period of difficulty. He has managed his own cancer diagnosis with a public honesty that no previous British monarch would have considered possible, and in doing so he has modeled a kind of authenticity that has changed the way many people think about him. He has shown up for his duties while managing treatment. He has been transparent about limitation while remaining functional. And he has placed his trust, formally and repeatedly, in the sibling who has been demonstrating for half a century that she will show up regardless of the circumstances. And turned 75 in August 2025. She drove herself to the Oxford Farming Conference in January 2026 for her first engagement of the new year. She is patron or president of more than 300 organizations. She decided when her own children were young that they would grow up without royal titles, because she believed a life without that particular weight would serve them better, a decision she has described simply as the right one. She survived a kidnapping attempt in 1974. She competed at the Montreal Olympics in 1976. She has carried out more official royal engagements than any other member of the royal family for most of the last decade. And she has done all of it without a press office managing her narrative, without a ghostwritten memoir, and without a streaming documentary explaining who she is. The record explains itself. The institution she serves is smaller than it has been in living memory, more strained, and more dependent on fewer people than anyone would have planned for. But the people at its center have spent their entire lives becoming exactly what this moment requires. That, for now, is where the British monarchy stands, and it is standing.